Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you jumped back on to our Going Deeper session. Thank you for your patience with us. We were having some issues with the other live stream, and so we wanted to make sure you could submit your questions, and we're excited to see all of you on here. It looks like we've got Tom Horn. It's so good to see you, and Joan, and so many others. Lisa, Adam, so good to see you guys. It's lovely. I'm going to turn my audio off there. So while we're waiting for you guys to submit your questions, I've got one I wanted to start with, Reverend Steve. Okay. So my question for you is, how do I stay focused in the world when there's so much upset in the world? So how do I stay focused on the truth in that?
Good question, Tammy. And the fact is, we can't do... Teacher of mine, Arnold Patton, used to say, we can't ride two horses with one behind. And it's true. You know, the principle you've heard me refer to from time to time is that what we focus on expands. If our focus is on too much news, I understand everybody wants to hear what's going on and get an idea, but it's real easy to get addicted to hearing so much news. Right. And invariably, 98% of that news is going to be negative. And it doesn't mean, again, that we're callous to what's going on in the world, but it does mean that we make a choice. You know, you use a piece to close out your page, each email. It's a quote from Dr. Hawkins, and I wrote it down and didn't get your permission to use it, but I got Doc's permission, I think.
Absolutely.
It's called "The experience of the presence of God is available and within at all times, but awaits choice." And so we have to choose where we're going to focus, which horse we're going to ride. If we choose the horse of the physical and the difficult things that are going on, then we'll ride that horse and we'll ride it right into the ground. But we can stay focused on the spiritual, the true,
right,
and at the same time be mindful of the things that we need to do. If we need to wear a mask, if we need to put on gloves, whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So it's interesting because I know you actually stay very well informed. So you pay attention to kind of what's happening in the world, and you're able to do that without being pulled in, without being sucked in. So
I have to pace myself.
Yeah.
And I have to really, I have to turn off the TV at when it feels like I'm getting too much.
Right.
I've got a little benefit right now in the fact that I'm alone in this nice little cottage that I live in, and so I can turn that TV off and not really have a lot of other distractions. It's more work, I know, for people who have a family that want to watch this or watch that or whatever the case may be, but it does come back to choice, and if we keep consistently choosing truth, spiritual books that speak to us, affirmations, songs that I asked Alexa this morning to play the prayer from Bocelli and Celine Dion, and before that song was over, I was sending light to the whole wide world. My heart got so full. Yeah. And so we have to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Reverend Steve.
Sure.
Waiting for some more questions coming in from our feed, but okay. I wanted to ask you, when you were talking, you said you would touch on Myrtle Fillmore a little bit more in our Going Deeper, so perhaps you could share some words. I thought that was so interesting about your mom. Yeah. I had no idea that she had tuberculosis.
She did and recovered from it, and in fact, it was her inspiration to become a nurse. The particular clinic that she went to in New York, upstate New York, had some amazing success in the late teens and early 20s of the 20th century, and that gave her the inspiration, being in that setting, to become a nurse, which she did. She became a public health nurse, and that's how she met my dad, and that's kind of how I'm here. But back to Myrtle Fillmore. Myrtle Fillmore, you know, she and Charles had been focused on the worldly ideas of allopathic medicine, and she had been told early on, you've inherited this. This is part of what you'll have to deal with.
Right.
And so she bought that the way we buy a lot of things. And in turn, she and Charles tried to find help through many, many different areas. It wasn't strictly allopathic, but it was a variety of things that presented themselves in the 1880s to them. She had children. She was unable to tend to them the way she wanted to. Charles Fillmore's mother came in to help out. But eventually, she was almost at the point of giving up. And she attended a lecture. Most of you know this story, or a lot of you do, by E.B. Weeks. And in that lecture, she sat spellbound as he said, "You're a child of God, and therefore you do not inherit sickness." He equated the words that I used from Ernest Holmes a little bit earlier, that we're spirit, we're spiritual beings. She caught that. Charles sat there and didn't quite get it right away, but Myrtle did. And she began to work with that idea and began to speak to her body over those weeks and months that ensued. Instead of living 6 months, she lived over 40 years. Wow. And she did that by speaking to her body in a very orderly manner to the centers of her body, to the spiritual centers and energy centers of her body, to her limbs, to her liver, to every organ, and said, "Look, I got it wrong. I apologize. I ask for your forgiveness." She enrolled the awareness of the presence of Jesus in that experience and said, "Help me with this process." She knew he was the great physician and the great way shower. Right. And so she deepened her relationship with that energy, and of course eventually came to find out that indeed that Christ that he demonstrated fully lived in her. Yeah. And that's what made the difference.
Wow. Thank you so much. So I've got a question from Courtney here. She would like to know what advice you would give on how to deal with the frustrations and act from love when it comes to dealing with their children right now. And I'm sure a lot of parents are dealing with that. They've got their kids around them kind of full time. So what advice would you have for them?
Well, first, a little funny around all that Courtney may have heard, and a lot of you may have heard, and that is that recently I heard that a homeschooling situation, 2 boys were suspended for fighting, and their teacher was suspended for drinking on the job. Well, we know that's not the answer. I did listen this past week to a child psychologist who said, it's so important to, and I realize a lot of you parents are doing this, and grandparents and great-grandparents, it's so important to draw the child aside and as much as possible try to explain, based on their age level, what's going on. And to really communicate to them, this is not, we know, an easy time for you, and it's not an easy time for mom and dad or the other guardians or parents that are there. And so they can often pick up on that. Now, more age-appropriate, smaller children, not going to be something that resonates so much, right. But they do pick up on our impatience, and they pick up on our fears. Yeah. And so that's why it's important, so important for us to not oversaturate with the news, not to let them have too much screen time with that kind of energy. Even some of the more angry games that kids play these days, it makes me a little shudder sometimes when I watch my grandkids playing some of those games. Most of them are pretty simple, and most of them are pretty benign, but it's important to monitor what they're seeing and what they're watching. It's good to do family things whenever possible. Mary was out in the backyard with one of our grandchildren this past week, and this is little Georgina, who's 4.5, and she was busy, wanted to climb trees and paint rocks and everything else. Grandma kept up as best she could, and finally made a FaceTime with me over here, and I got to have a bit of an experience with that sweet setting.
I heard that happening while I was in my office.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
okay.
How sweet.
Well, so I'm not the expert on this, but there are good resources online, and so I would encourage you, go online and say, what do I do? There's some good teachers out there that have some ideas, and I encourage you to try and delve into them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And if any of you watching have access to those resources, perhaps you can go ahead and comment, and that way we have the collective energy of all of us being teachers to one another.
Yes.
That would be great. Okay, while we wait, I had one more question I wanted to ask you. I had to jot it down so I wouldn't forget.
Okay.
So speaking of kids, you've kind of already touched on it a little bit, but what would you tell your children? What are you telling? And it's all children of all ages.
Yeah.
So what do you tell your children specifically that helps them?
Well, my children are, of course, adults.
Right.
And I'm reminding them of the importance of the things that I talked about a little bit earlier. One of them is in a setting where he has his own child and a foster child, and this foster child is 2 years old and full of energy and all over the place.
Right.
He's now working at home, and so I'm trying to encourage him and his wife to be as patient as they can, particularly with the 2-year-old. The 13-year-old is pretty well easy to guide, but the other
Right.
little guy is a handful. So just encouraging them to do some of the things I talked about. Play some positive music. Try to do some
Yeah.
things as a family. Go out into the backyard when they can. One of those children, the one that I just mentioned, has just moved right in the middle of all of this.
Oh,
And so
wow.
the difficulty of moving to a new house and a new area, but they're managing. With our
course.
grandchildren, when we get to connect with them, I kind of pride myself, I guess you'd say, in a good sense of humor. And I try to use that sense of humor with my grandchildren when I'm in touch with them. A couple of them are 13, and it's like, well, what does Grandpa know, But he knows a couple of things, and I know almost always I can help them laugh. I can help them smile. And that benefits them, and it benefits their mom, and I think it benefits the other kids as well. So just trying our best to walk our talk with our kids. And I know it's not easy. A lot of you have financial things that you're dealing with, and that makes it extra tough. But I do encourage you to continue to stay as positive as you can, as loving as you can, to plug them into the beautiful resources that we have through our youth and family ministry here. I know I sound like I'm doing a commercial for that, but
No.
it's a beautiful, beautiful resource.
Well, and Neil wanted to mention that the Profound Parenting is meeting, I think it's twice a month. And of course, it's on our calendar, on our website. But they're meeting over Zoom, and that's a great resource for parents right now.
Yes,
So the
profound parenting. Please take advantage.
First and third Sunday mornings from 10 to 11 with Sandy Blackard and Jennifer Fireisel. Thank you so much, Neil, for jumping in with that resource. Appreciate
Yes,
you.
thank
And I have
you.
another question. This one
Yes.
comes from Hope. How would you describe your truth in this situation? It's easy to get distracted, especially when there are some appearances of lack everywhere you look. So, how would you describe your truth?
How would I describe my truth? That's a beautiful question. That was from Hope, is that right?
Yes.
Thank you for that question, Hope. As a minister and acting as your interim minister here in this church, I'm sensitive to the fact that we're kind of in a lot of different places with this. There are people in the congregation, and understandably, who are in fear. And that doesn't mean that if we go out and wear a mask or gloves or do the social distancing that we're asked to do, the physical distancing, that we're in fear. Not at all. But it does mean that sometimes when these kinds of things are going on, and there's so much fortification, if you will, for the illusion of illness and the illusion of death, because I don't believe in either one in the
Right.
absolute. I'm not callous to the fact that we have these bodies and that we
Right.
can have these illnesses and have these pieces to deal with. But really, Good Friday and Easter Sunday were all about reminding us that we are whole, holy, spiritual beings. Nothing can happen to us. Nothing
Absolutely.
can happen. Nothing but God here, as our friend
Right.
Lance likes to say. And that beautiful man says that, moving through the difficulty that he's moving through, close to stepping through to that next experience. And that is a beautiful representation of walking the talk. So it's when I referenced Dr. Roger Teal's talk I think the title of that talk is, Who Do You Think You Are? And if you can go to YouTube and watch that amazing, amazing talk that Dr. Teal does. This is back when he was the acting senior minister at Mile High.
Right,
Of course, he's now the minister emeritus there. But that is a beautiful talk that reminds us that it is so important not to bring over with us into this experience a lot of the baggage and division that we've been carrying over the last number of years. It's understandable that we're still going to see things differently.
Right.
And I understand that. I get that. But it's also important that we let love bubble to the surface, that we rise in consciousness, and that we can still have our differences. We can still have our things that we feel like we need to do socially and so forth, or socially active and so forth. But it's so important to gravitate to the love. And that is really what is important to me. I hope that helps.
Absolutely.
I hope that helps
helps.
your question, Hope.
Yeah. Well, any closing thoughts that you have for our congregation today, Reverend Steve?
Well, there is one. I read to you a little bit from Dr. Hawkins' book, and I'm going to kind of step out on a limb just a little bit here because this may fly in the face of some of our media folks and it's really kind of for media all across the board. But he says the idea, for instance, that colds are catching is a good example. The thought that everybody got a cold will be subscribed to by a person who has sufficient guilt, fear, and naivete regarding the lessons or the laws of consciousness. This doesn't mean that we use this understanding of our third principle. Thoughts and feelings held in mind and heart produce after their kind, but it does allow us to stand in this law as the great teachers always ask us to do, as I referenced in the lesson today, to stand in this law to feel a greater sense of control, if you will, not control of our friends and family and what they think and what they do, but control of our own beingness and the choices that we make. He says, because of that unconscious guilt, a person unconsciously feels they deserve a cold. Hear me say, none of us deserve a cold. None of us deserve the coronavirus. If we happen to get it, we happen to get it, and we deal with it as best we can. The person who's let go of the underlying negative energies of guilt and fear does not have a fearful mind that believes a cold is going around, I'll probably get it because everyone else does. We equip ourselves with this truth, and it allows us to go out into the world much stronger. And we're going to be asked to do that more and more as the days unfold. Eventually, we're going to open our doors here on Sunday morning, and I realize it may be a few people here and there taking care of themselves and honoring where they need to be, but also a stepping out. And we'll come to that point where it's time for us to do that. I hope this has been helpful. I am grateful for all of you, for your questions, for your being willing to listen to us, Tammy, for your moderating this piece so lovingly and making this possible for folks to experience.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you all, yes, for watching today and for being with us. And if that's it, then I think we'll go ahead and sign off. And everybody have a beautiful day and a wonderful week. We love you.
We love you. See you next Sunday.
Bye.